It's the most important election in a generation, so we're putting the questions you want answered to the politicians vying to lead the nation for the next 3 years. Kia ora everyone and welcome into our second New Zealand Herald virtual town hall, where tonight we're joined by ACT Party leader David Seymour. We're getting your answers on everything from COVID-19 and border security to the economic slump it's brought with it, as well as jobs, education, housing, the environment and healthcare. Join in the comment section. We'll put your questions to David Seymour himself. It's your vote. This is about getting your questions answered at New Zealand's home of election 2020. Okay. David Seymour of the ACT Party, you've got to put your phone down. He's sharing.
I'm trying to get your ratings up.
Well, listen, mate. Let me tell you, we don't have any problem with that at the New Zealand Herald. I'll tell you that for nothing. But we do appreciate you sharing along the way and getting people involved. But you've got to put your phone down. You're more digitally connected than I am. First up, give me your 60-second pitch on why people need to vote ACT.
Well, look, I mean, the impact of COVID is unimaginably hard, but I think there's also an opportunity to rebuild a country that we can all be proud of if we get this right. And I think, first of all, you've got to accept a new reality that this virus is not going anywhere. And actually, we've got to get smarter in the way that we adapt. And one of the big things that we need to get on top of is debt. So, we say that politicians should live within the same means as everybody else. And that means that, there's a lot of necessities we've got to keep spending on, social services and so on. But there's also a lot of waste that we've got to reduce to get back on top of this debt. And if we do those things, I think we can do well. I'm trying to get elected, a truly independent team of thoughtful members of Parliament under the ACT banner to hold them all accountable so we can make that sort of progress with a better Parliament.
And presumably affect change as well as just holding people accountable. You're now polling at 7%. I wonder if that's a vote of confidence for ACT policies or a vote of no confidence perhaps in the National Party and potentially New Zealand First.
Well, it's interesting because people say, well, you're getting votes because other people aren't. I mean, that's sort of always going to be logically true. If you've got them, they don't. Yep. But, I just point out that all around the world, if you're the governing party, then through a crisis you're doing quite well. Sure. We're just about the only party in the world that's an opposition party that's actually risen through this crisis. And I think if there's anything, what people are telling me, it's because we've been consistent and constructive. I'm not saying the government are all idiots and it's easy, and what we are saying is that we got to do better.
Where are your votes coming from though, New Zealand First or National?
Well, actually, parties don't own votes. But there are some analyses, another network I won't mention did a poll where they asked who the people voting for us voted for last time. Yep. So less than half of them said National, 10% of them said Maori Party, 10% of them said New Zealand First. Okay. But we got people that used to vote for the Green Party, and they're saying, look, we're liberals, we believe in freedom of our body, freedom of our mind and our thought and our speech, and we can't believe the Greens have become the thought police.
Is it a vote in policy or is it a protest vote?
I think if you look at our mental health policy, for instance, even people on the hard left are saying ACT has got the most thoughtful policy. We've listened to the mental health review and we've got a plan to actually ensure that mental health dollars go further and work for people because there's so much frustration with it right now. Okay,
let's stick to the top and then we'll get to the mental health later on. You're going from one MP by yourself. You could be potentially conducting a caucus of 8+, who knows. Have you ever managed that sort of number of people before?
Well, actually, I coached rugby for 7 seasons, so that was 15 at the time. So if our polling keeps going up, we should be
Were
fine.
They all as amateur rugby players, though, as some of your potential MPs coming in?
Well, I think that's really unfair. Have you met any of them?
I've obviously read the policy mandates. I'm not too sure about meeting.
So you don't know if they're amateur because you haven't met them.
No, but
well, let me tell. Can I tell you about? Nobody has when they first enter Parliament. So if that was a disqualification, we wouldn't have a Parliament. But can I tell you about some of them?
Okay.
Yeah. So you look at Brooke Van Velden. She's smart, she's liberal, she's likeable. She's from a small business background. She has millennial social values, but she doesn't want to be a socialist. And I hired her out of the private sector. I got her on board to help with the End of Life Choice Act. And in the back room, she did a huge amount of the work, holding together a coalition of 70 MPs who had almost nothing in common except they voted for that. And she used a lot of the skills that I think are going to make her a great MP on day one. You look at Nicole McKee, you know, when our nation had a major division and a major crisis after that tragedy in Christchurch, I'm so glad as a New Zealander that the person who came forward and spoke for licensed firearm owners was a calm, measured, rational woman called Nicole McKee, who became the Communicator of the Year 2020 for her role in doing that. She's going to be a great MP. And I can keep going, but I see you.
Yeah, I wonder if, as a lobbyist like Nicole McKee for the gun lobby, someone that you'd want in your party, given what...
Well, see, now this is you don't know her, you see. So if you look at Nicole's story, you know, she had 3 children under 3, and she said it's very hard to play netball when you're pregnant. And she actually got involved in target shooting. Then her husband, while she had 4 kids, decided he wanted to study a law degree. So she got involved in hunting to feed her family. And then when she was a firearms safety instructor all over New Zealand, teaching people how to do it safely, then when she was asked to speak during that time, she was the one that came forward and did it in a really well, calmly measured way. Now, you just called her a whole lot of epithets. You called her a lobbyist and all the rest. You know, I think we got to get away from that sort of labelling.
We got to get.
Well, that's what we just did. And you just chose to label and pigeonhole her for one thing that she's done. And I think we got to get away from that sort of politics.
Okay, well let's move on as well. Let's talk about this question from Luke Wynn. He asks, what's your view on the use of 1080?
Look, I think 1080 is something that is going to be necessary for the foreseeable future.
Nicole McKee said after a 1080 drop, the silence in the bush is deafening.
And that's obviously reflecting an experience that she's had. But again, you know, you can't put people in boxes and not listen to everything they've said. She also said it's something that's going to be necessary. The question is, do we want to be dropping poison all over the conservation
So is that a problem with messaging from Nicole McKee then? Is that what happens sometimes when you get new candidates? Because when you say things...
because actually she said 3 things and you've chosen to pick up on one line from her speech. Now, if you apply that standard to everybody and then say it's their problem with messaging, I don't think that's fair.
And surely Nicole would understand the dialogue that is existing around Aotearoa at the moment around 1080, right? And surely that would ignite some of the potential fire that some people have in their bellies around 1080 with a statement like that, wouldn't it?
No, because, I mean, you know, we're not communicating to the lowest common denominator.
No. Okay, so you're saying people who don't believe in
people are smart enough to actually listen to a full message.
Okay, so that's one perspective. Was Dancing with the Stars a success for you? Was it about softening the image of perhaps a hardline party?
It wasn't that deliberate, to be honest. It was just your life is a series of experiences, and the thing I got from Dancing with the Stars was we live in a great country. So, you know, if you be yourself and back yourself, you might be surprised how many people will support you. Now, I knew I was no good. Most people knew I was no good. But giving it a go was something that really engaged a lot of people. And it made me realise that actually this is a place where people will back you for giving it a go. And that was such a positive thing.
Let's move on to the gun policy. You once said we are no safer as a result of government law changes. How can you say that?
Well, very easily. So if you look at the law changes that were made, first of all, they were rushed and they were ineffective. So if you look at the number of firearms...
No safer as a result? 56,000 weapons taken back taken off the street, assault weapons banned. How is it no
Well,
safer?
first of all, they're not weapons. Weapons are something that you use to hurt other people.
What's a gun for?
These were firearms.
What's a gun for?
Well, usually, in New Zealanders' case, it's for hunting, it's for pest control, it's for target shooting. That's what New Zealanders use them for. So you bought back from the most honest people, probably the ones that they were most keen to get rid of. On the other hand,
but you accept a lot of gun crime is from stolen weapons, right? Often from people who had nothing, who had neither any ideas around it being used.
Okay. If I tell you how this interview will go much better, is if you let me finish complete sentences.
Sure. I'm conscious of our time, and we want to make sure that we cover all the issues in a fair way.
And if you keep interrupting, we won't do it. So, here's the point: 56,000 brought back. The total number that were banned were 240,000. So you got 180,000 that went missing. Meanwhile, the divisiveness means that the trust in police amongst licensed firearm owners, who should be the eyes and ears of police, is at an all-time low. Meanwhile, you've got laws like the fact that you're invading the doctor-patient relationship, but in relation with mental health. That means that people are going to be less likely to seek help because it's been stigmatised if they're a licensed firearm owner. So all of those things have actually done damage. But here's the real issue. And I'm sorry to go on, but these are topics that are worth covering.
Yeah, sure.
But the real issue is this. How did a foreign national get off a plane by 2 AR-15s? He was a single male living alone whose travel history was Ukraine, North Korea, Pakistan, Balkans, and nobody in our system had the job of looking at that profile and thinking, gee, he just bought 7,000 rounds of ammunition by mail order that was signed off by the police. That's the real failing, and we haven't fixed that. And the laws that were made, not only were they ineffective because they didn't hand back a fraction of the firearms that they banned, not only were they divisive because you got all-time low trust in police, but they're also premature because until the Royal Commission reports back and explains what actually went wrong, we can't fix it. So the ACT Party is committed to fixing the problem, but also giving some dignity back to people that have been scapegoated for something that had nothing to do with them.
And the ACT Party believes that 56,000 weapons taken off the street makes the country no safer as a result of that.
No, it doesn't, because you've got to add that with all the other harms that have been done by bad laws.
Okay, talk to me about rolling back the second round of gun law reform. Why?
So if you look at the three things that it did, first of all, it's introduced a register. Okay, so a register is not going to make people safer.
Why is that?
Because half of the firearms that the police confiscate from illegal ownership have the serial number ground off. So if a register was effective, there's
But what about the other half?
Well, if a register was effective, there's the solution from the criminal's point of view. The second thing is, and this is a real danger, every now and then the government loses data. So you imagine you're somebody who actually owns a firearm, and you get to the stage where it's been leaked, and you know that potentially the worst gang in New Zealand knows what you have and where you live, and it's a steal to order list. Terrifying.
So that's
we
a
talked
failure
about
of government information security more than it is about having a register. Sure.
Yeah, and if the register was going to deliver some benefits, you might take that risk, but actually there's no benefit to it. So and here's the next thing. We talked about the doctor-patient relationship, highly damaging. The other thing this legislation does is it puts onerous regulations on clubs, and the net effect of that, and we were told at the select committee by many people involved, is that people are going to be less likely to have clubs, and that means that they're going to go and do firearm activities in less organised ways with fewer people keeping tabs on each other. So for all those reasons, we think it's going to do a lot of damage and should be reversed.
What would you say to the families, the 50-plus families that lost their family members as a result of that attack in Christchurch when they look at these, when they look at you threatening to do this? What do you say to them?
Well, it's not a threat, and you got to be careful. See, you're making an assumption.
But we can answer the question as opposed to the semantics of the question. So you take of it what you will and explain to me what you would say to those family members.
Well, no, you're making an assumption that you're assuming that I don't care. Well,
that's
actually,
not true. I didn't say that. I said, what would you say to the family members?
And that I'm threatening to take the laws away. You're assuming that they support the laws. Well, actually, FIANZ had their own investigation into how this happened, because they are not entirely on board with the government's response. So what I'd say to them is we need to be safer, but the government's premature, ineffective, rushed and divisive response hasn't made us safer. We are going to make everybody safer from what happened in our nation's tragedy in Christchurch.
I wonder if you might say to them, this is part of ACT's policies, Act believes in liberalisation around these policies rather than sort of saying we're going to fix this and we're going to. Is that not a more sort of honest response that you believe in gun freedom?
No, because that's not our policy. Mischaracterise it as you might. Let me say it again. The honest response is that we and most, if not all people in the licensed firearm community are concerned about safety, and that's the number one priority. The second issue is, yes, people who feel scapegoated by ineffective laws that have been designed to punish them actually do want to be treated like adults in a safer set of laws.
Let's move on to your COVID response. Talk us through your COVID response around Airbnb and this kind of thing.
So it's interesting you raise that because, you know, Airbnb is one example of the approach that Taiwan takes.
Sure.
What we need to do is take a Taiwanese approach to this COVID disaster as it's becoming for so many people. If you look at what they've done, well, in 5 quick points, they have a central epidemic command centre. Our plan with an epidemic response unit that's multidisciplinary, public and private sector, because I don't think that the Ministry of Health, good people that they are the right people to do software development. They're not the right people to do distribution of PPE. You know, we need a more epidemic-focused response unit. The second thing is the government's got to become the referee in the game, not the player. So you look at when they do MIQ, you know, they've failed by their own standards multiple times. But there's no one holding them accountable, because if you're enforcing the rules and you're actually following them,
they fail with the private market as well, right? With security at some of these, obviously they moved NZDF into some of these. So both there's been failings on both sides as well. And if we look across the ditch at Victoria as well, we see a lot of the issues there too.
But that's why you need to separate who is providing and who's actually holding accountable. Once you've got a conflict in those two, you've got a real problem. You've got to do both jobs. So we would say, look, let's set the rules for MIQ and say, look, if you can follow these rules, and we will use mystery shoppers and undercover police to make sure you're following them, then you can do it. And I think there's a lot of people in the private sector who would do it a lot better. And that means...
Is it not too high risk though? Because
no,
if we look at what's happening in Victoria now, those people are still in some form of lockdown.
The risk is, if you keep... and here's the fifth and final, I'll skip out 2 just for now. The fifth and final is we've actually got to start asking ourselves, how can we do better? So I think one of the things that people are sick of is constantly saying, you're lucky you're not Victoria. You know, comparing ourselves to the worst all the time. We've got to actually aim to be the best.
But we need to consider introducing potential failures in the system, right?
Yeah. So look, so let's make the government the referee, set clear rules of the game, let people get on with it. And there's so many options. You know, there's a group of high school principals who want to bring international students back next year. They have a plan to do it. They should be allowed to. Government should be refereeing the game, not trying to play it. And then you get to number 3, you've got to be risk appropriate. So, you know, there are some countries have no COVID. There's a lot of countries that have just as much community transmission as the South Island. If it's safe to go to Queenstown from Auckland, then surely it's safe to go to Perth.
This is Nikki Besson's question. She asks, how are you going to open up the borders and when? You've kind of explained how.
Yeah, so the when, there's things you could do right now. You could say, look, anywhere that has the same standards of public health and community transmission as the South Island, you can go there. You could do that immediately. You know, you look at Samoa, RSE workers, you look at international students with the principals plan. All of these things can actually be done almost immediately. Obviously, sitting in opposition, you want to get into government, see the lie of the land, get the advice, but almost immediately could be done. And then the real question is, look, let's ask ourselves every day, what can we do today that we couldn't do yesterday? And you might be surprised at how many options there are. Have a look at Taiwan. You know, they've got great public health, they've got it under control. A lot of New Zealanders would like to go there.
Do you believe that coronavirus has maybe been overblown in terms of the response to the coronavirus itself on economies?
Look, I think we need to
and on our government, I should say. Do you believe our government is overblown?
I think our government at various times hasn't put enough weight on all the other health issues that there are. You know, you look at the people who have missed out on breast cancer and prostate screening. You look at the cost of a lockdown and the pharmaceutical budget. You know, the lockdowns cost all the pharmaceuticals.
Do you believe people have died as a result of that kind of thing?
Look, I think it's inevitably true that they have, but you know, I don't want to get into the sort of morbid discussion.
Maybe we should move on to this question. How much COVID is tolerable in New Zealand? How much community spread would we have, and how far would you need to go to lockdown?
So here's the issue: is you've always got to keep the transmission rate under 1, because as soon as you get into an exponential growth, you're basically from 0 to 100 in seconds. The real question is your tracing fast enough that you can keep up with it without locking everyone down? And I look at Sam Morgan's COVID card as one idea, $100 million. And if it had a 10% chance of working, then that's got to be better than going into a $2 billion lockdown. But we haven't been welcoming private and public cooperation to get that sort of stuff done.
In the defence of the Ministry of Health, they argued that they didn't really love the idea of working with a private organisation like that in terms of data sharing.
Well, that's your problem, though. I mean, you look at Taiwan, and that's why we talk about the Central Epidemic Command Centre. You know, those guys. They actually.
Are you saying the COVID app failed? We had a yarn about that before, and you provided some stats about how many people are scanning, for example, and that kind of stuff. Instead of using potential Bluetooth technology, you more or less said it was a failure, right?
Oh well, it's a joke. I mean, look, you know, I haven't seen the numbers for the last few days, but it's been like 1 million scans a day. There's 5 million people. I go to at least 10 places a day. There should be 50 million a day, and there's what, 1 million.
So they're still failing on that.
So no one's using it.
We need to move on to the economy. Camellia Lee asks, if you really care for reducing debt, why would you not consider a cap gains tax?
A couple of reasons. One is that it's a very poor way of raising revenue.
Why is that?
Basically because it's really administratively complex, and at the end of the day,
in a market increasing like ours, a huge amount of money, right?
And people find a way to get around it is your other problem, because it's complex. The second thing I'd say is that the other effect it has is that it actually reduces the incentive to save and invest and do innovative stuff, because you know that if you succeed, you don't just get taxed on your income going in, you don't just get taxed on income coming out.
At a time of COVID, like we were just talking about, you look at fixed assets and you look at the stock market hitting record highs and stuff like that, and it's growing exponentially. It's through the roof. That's surely where your tax base is, to go get money, not to do things, for example, like what you're saying, which is a 3-year moratorium on minimum wage increases or cutting benefits to pre-COVID levels and stuff like that. The revenue generating stuff that's happening at the moment is in that high net worth individual market.
Okay, so here's the question. We want a recovery where one New Zealander offers another New Zealander a job hundreds of thousands of times, and actually hopefully it's not because they're unemployed, it's because it's a better job with more investment, more capital to work with. Now, if anyone thinks that more taxes are going to encourage that kind of activity, then I don't really have an answer for them. That's just not how the world works.
But wealthy people still like to make money, don't they? Wealthy people will always be driven and motivated to make
but
money.
let's get away from this, putting people in boxes and stereotyping. Let's just ask, what is the effect, cause and effect of a policy? So, you have prejudices against wealthy people, fine, but actually the marginal effect of a new tax is that it's going to be less likely that people will do work, save, invest activity that creates jobs and better opportunity.
I'd say the other characterisation of my prejudice against people who are wealthy.
But why is it?
For a record, we very much love all these people. But what we need to look at
is it relevant then? Why raise it?
Because what I'll say is that we talked about, going back to the core question, which was raising money, because you are talking about the future generations and stuff like that. And where the financial growth is at the moment is in financial markets and in housing. If you look at the last year, even with COVID, 17% increases in house prices. And our last report on One Roof had about 22% month on month. Meanwhile, employees perhaps who don't own assets are facing job cuts, and they're also facing, the wage subsidy as well, where obviously their wages have been scaled really far back.
So can we just untangle a few issues here, because you're raising a lot of stuff. So first of all, if we want that kind of jobs-rich, private sector, business-led economy, then everything the government does to discourage people from working, saving and investing is bad news. So having an extra public holiday, an extra 5 days of sick pay, putting up the minimum wage when there is no revenue for most businesses.
And I think all of
these things are damaging. So we got to so first do no harm. That's the first thing.
No, listen,
Yep,
I think about that.
Okay.
I'm just wondering.
So just wanted to answer that stuff. Second of all, let's get to your point, which I think is an interesting one, about the fact that you've had massive asset price inflation, and particularly in housing, but again,
where people don't work, do they? If you own a property, you have the fortune of living in a property.
Well, I think if you're in the property market at a certain time, you've done quite well.
Yeah.
And so, but I would go back to the root cause of why that's happening, and I would identify two reasons. In the case of housing, fundamentally it's just too hard to build homes. So since the 70s, our population's increased 2 million. We still don't build as many homes as we built then. It's crazy.
And you've got some really interesting RMA reforms, obviously.
Yeah, so our housing policy that came out yesterday is all about planning and permitting of land. It's all about funding infrastructure with 30-year partnerships between central and regional and local government, and it's about getting councils out of building inspections because they're hopeless. They created leaky buildings and they slow everything down. So that's about how we actually build more homes, because ultimately, money's money, but the question is, how many people are there and how many houses, and that depends how fast we build them.
I wonder, we were just talking about increasing the tax rate.
Yeah, so I want to talk, but I want to talk about how you actually solve that problem. So the first thing is supply of housing. The second thing is supply of money. And I hate to tell you this, but I actually think monetary policy is going to become sexy again. I think it's going to become a dinner table conversation. Now, look, you heard it here first, right? But, the thing is that what Adrian Orr has just done, printing $100 billion, is massively distortionate.
True.
And you look at what happened with QE in the UK. Now, they have a capital gains tax, by the way.
Yeah.
They for 12 years, they just printed pounds to try and make things go. And you wonder why so many young people voted for Jeremy Corbyn. He swept under 25s in the last election. Even though the guy's a certifiable lunatic and arguably an anti-Semite. Well, basically, because if you're a young person in the UK...
We'll make sure that's obviously the view of the ACT Party.
ACT
Party leader. We won't bring the Royal New Zealand Herald into that, I'm afraid.
Sure. But they voted for him. And it's the same with Sanders in the US, because they'd watched for 12 years everything getting further away as asset prices inflated. But the key issues are it's too hard to build a house, and monetary policy's gone skew if. All those other countries have capital gains taxes, by the way. It's not going to solve your problem.
Well, capital gains tax does help, though, right? That's why those countries have that.
I think it's a poor way of raising revenue. And by the way, once upon a time, no other country let women vote. Lucky Kate Shepherd didn't listen to that logic.
The winter energy payment goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
KiwiSaver contributions.
Yeah, why would you borrow money to invest in the share market at this time?
Cutting benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Levels.
We're going to cut them to the level. The Labour Party passed 2 budgets in its first 2 years with those levels of budget. Now, if it's so horrible, go and talk to Jacinda Ardern.
I wonder if there is a point where the egalitarian society that we have in New Zealand and the nature that we're Kiwis and we like sort of looking after each other and we give each other a hand up, does that ever count to you?
Yeah, very much so.
So
why would you think it wouldn't?
Why are we going then after the absolute lowest income earners, minimum wage increases being held off, benefit levels to pre-COVID levels? These are people that are not, they're not living the high life at this point, right?
Well,
at the same time, no capital gains tax at the top, and at the bottom.
No, we're not going after anybody. Let me just remind you that I was behind charter schools. We actually gave opportunity to kids who never get a go in this country.
Well,
and you know what the hang on a second, hang on. You're trying to characterise me a certain way, and you're totally wrong in the way you do it.
Policies,
I'm telling you about my policies, and now I'm going to come back and talk to you about these.
Okay.
The real question is, are you going to get a job? Because from an employer's point of view, $1.20 minimum wage increase every year means they got to get 6% productivity, and most people would love to do that, but
Why
they
not
can't.
temporarily help the employer then?
still help the little, because what
but
we
this
know,
is your
right,
problem, right?
So I'll cite this UN
Yeah.
economic arm saying, right, the repeat cost cutting conducted by governments after the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 would choke off recovery and risk a double dip recession in 2022, right?
Yeah.
The idea is you give money to the less wealthy people, they spend it, you give money to...
Robin Hood. It sounds like you're reading an economics study for the first time. But coming back to what you were trying to ask about, is if we want people to offer one Kiwi a job from another hundreds of thousands of times, then every time you put an impediment in the way, that's less likely to happen. So
and
minimum
their
wage.
assets that are earning shouldn't be taxed, but wages.
Well, here's the practical reality, right? So you talk to someone who's an employer, and they say, look, minimum wage increase means I need to make 6% productivity growth every year. Can't do that. I can raise my prices to some extent, but actually I'm exposed to international competition. So if I keep doing that, I lose market share. You know what that means? Employ fewer people. So what's left? So no, hang on. So you asked the question. Just because the answers aren't simple doesn't mean they're not right.
I think they're quite circular, though. Is my question. We've got so much
not at all. So then here's the other option they have, is they can cut into their returns on their capital. But you know what that means? Fewer people want to invest in them. So what happens there? Oh, well, they can't employ as many people. So that's the practical reality. So instead of
this is
as told to me by someone who employs. No, sorry. This is as told to me by someone who employs thousands of people. So it's very much the practical reality they face.
And with all due respect, I'd like, because you're offering your perspective, and I've actually worked in business and in the technology sector as well, right? And what I will tell you in the technology sector that's growing really fast, at no point did any of our founders or CEOs say, we don't want to grow and hire more people because there's tax increases on the way. It was never, these people are very inspired, and I think you might be underestimating Kiwi small business owners if you say that they're not inspired to want to grow their business with or without tax increases.
I think we got into the caring about the egalitarian thing. Actually, I'm the guy that put most of his political capital into education for disadvantaged kids. And by the way, the objection to minimum wage is based on very practical concerns expressed by people who are actually trying to employ other New Zealanders. Okay. Now, to come back to your folks in the tech sector, it's not about are people inspired, it's about what practical difference do policy changes make at the margin. We want New Zealand to grow out of this, and that requires that we actually stop putting barriers in the way to growth.
Let's get some quick fire. You've said that legalising other drugs is not a priority, but you do you personally support it? Would that be something?
No, look, I just look at where we're at with P and the amount of people that have come to me as an electorate MP affected by P, and I just think, I think what we need to do is actually hold the line there.
What about LSD or MDMA? We know what the Young Act Party, obviously you had some stern words for them, but is there, you're the Libertarian Party, surely it's live and let live, is that not?
Yeah, look, I'm up for the philosophy, but in terms of those issues, it's just I'm far more focused on, how do we get out of COVID? How do we pay down the debt?
But you're in for 3 years, right? The potential of something like that, if there was if the public zeitgeist was moving for it, you'd support LSD or?
Oh, look,
MDMA,
to be honest, I don't know a lot about it. My basic view is that you get one opportunity to experience the world through your mind, and I just don't understand why you'd want to distort that with chemicals.
But you are libertarian, so presumably you would say yes to that if that was.
Well, yeah, but you got to remember, I also don't think that there should be income tax ultimately.
Sure.
I think if we could have a world with no income tax, that'd be great. So if you want to play that game, sure. But
what are your three not necessarily deal breakers, because I understand the way that you negotiate doesn't work like that. But what are your top three really important things that you would go into negotiation with?
So I think first of all we've got to get Taiwan smart about COVID. Okay. We've got to be able to maintain elimination without lockdowns. We've got to be able to safely reconnect with the world just by asking every day, what can we do that we couldn't do yesterday, and stop feeding the fear. Number two, we've got to get this debt under control. So, if you believe that the future of New Zealand as an equitable society involves handouts, then you're wrong. We've actually got to grow out of this, and we're not going to grow with the amount of debt that we currently have.
An equitable society?
No, I think we can have an equitable society with better social services, which I've talked about, through better growth, which means opportunity, not by continual handouts, which is some people's answer. Then
should people be living in cars?
No. Why would you think that?
We've previously spoken about, you've spoken about some of the motels and stuff like that in your electorate and the nightmare that they've had in terms of people going into those environments and damaging them and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering, where do you put these kind of people?
Well, where you put that, so you go back to our housing policy, because, and let's just talk about housing for a moment, and let's talk about equity, because you care about this, right? Or so do I. So, 30 years ago, we had the poorest 20% of households spending a quarter of their income on housing. Now it's over half. So you want to know why there's kids in cars and garages and motels and don't have enough money for food and so on. It's because so much more of the average household's income, the poorest household's income is tied up by housing costs. By the way, capital gains. By the way, capital gains tax in other countries hasn't solved that problem. All that does is make the government a partner in the gains. So what you have to do is ask, how do we make it easier to build a home? And that's that housing policy I was talking about earlier. And that's the only way you're truly going to get that egalitarian society you want.
Multiple Facebook users coming in here on top of me asking if you were going to be if you are on Tinder already. Asking, well, give me the Tinder, yes or no?
Well, I'm not on Tinder.
Righto. Do you want to be Deputy Prime Minister? I mean, you've said no, but why
There's
not?
such a variety of questions.
Well, this is how the social media works. You should know. You started the interview with it.
That's true. Must be those people from Instagram. Look, why wouldn't you want to be? Well, because the experience I've had, John Key said, do you want to be a minister? I said, look, I think I'll have to give up the end-of-life choice bill. So I've looked at it. I mean, you get the pay rise, you get the limo, you get the tie, you get all that stuff, right? But ultimately, you become an employee of the Prime Minister, who is the leader of another party. Then I said, okay, if I stick it out and keep this End-of-Life Choice Act going, then that's actually real change. And if this thing passes, and I hope we can talk about why it should, thousands of people are going to have dignity and control and choice and receive compassion at the end of their life, the way I hope they've been offering compassion to everyone else throughout their life. And that is an improvement to New Zealand. And ironically, sometimes if you're prepared to maintain your independence and turn down the offices and the baubles, you've got a greater opportunity to make those improvements.
Can't you do both by influencing policy in that cabinet level as a deputy PM and
you'd think
also
so.
Be your own man?
You'd think so, but it seems that everyone that's done that, Jim Anderton was the Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters was the Deputy Prime Minister, the Greens looking shaky. I think they might make it back.
They might get
shaky.
Voted out, but they do achieve things, right? That's one of your criticisms of Winston Peters, probably.
Well, he's achieved nothing. I mean, if you're a journalist, what are you going to say was his legacy?
From his legacy is what he's killed, basically, in Parliament. So he's gone through and he got rid of capital gains tax.
Right. So his great achievement was putting people into power that wanted to do something, then stopping them doing it. Right.
Well, but certainly, if you vote for Winston Peters and you vote for him on a policy mandate that he's advocating for, you'd probably say that he's your man in the cabinet and he's doing that regardless of where you stand on the policy.
He said he was going to go down Pike River, but anyway.
Absolutely, but let's not go too far there. Well, let's talk about the euthanasia though, because you brought it up.
Yeah.
Do you, as an individual, ever worry that even one person could die inappropriately as a result of this law?
No. Because if you look at the end-of-life decisions that people are making, and they make a lot, they don't have any of the safeguards for continuing treatment, doing operations, turning off life support. All that stuff happens every day. None of the safeguards that we've got. This is going to be the safest end-of-life decision-making process in New Zealand, and actually probably it's going to save people's lives by bringing them into a rigorously safeguarded process.
There's been instances around the world though where there have been prosecutions and that kind of thing. Not a huge amount of them, but there have been those instances. And before,
tell me about one of them.
Until you've tested, there was a doctor recently in Amsterdam that was being charged. My question is, until you test something, how do you know how it's going to work?
So first of all, that's the only one that I'm aware of, and And that one in the Netherlands was actually somebody with an advance directive. So you sign a piece of paper, it says, if I lose my mind, then you make the decision for me. That's not available in our law, and it's quite deliberate. I think that goes too far. It should always be the person's decision. But then your question, has it been tested? Well, we've now got 200 million people who live in, we're not Kate Shepherd coming first in the world here, that we're a long way behind. We're 20 years and 200 million people behind the state of the art on this. But that also means we've got a huge amount of evidence. There's been studies on the studies even.
I just wonder how you would know, because the person who's probably the key witness is dead.
Well, let's put it this way. In Oregon, they've had it for 22 years, and not one person's complained. In the Netherlands, they had it for 15 years, and in 2016, I got hold of some of their market research into what the Dutch people really think about the issue. 88% support, 6% are opposed. Now, if it was the case that people were being surreptitiously bumped off the way that the sort of borderline conspiracy theorist opponents like to spread misinformation and spook people with, if any of that was true, do you really think after 15 years only 6% of Dutch people would be opposed?
I just wonder if as I brought up before, if the key witnesses, if you disagree that the key witness is dead.
Yeah,
I wonder if we move on to palliative care.
I understand
why not palliative care?
So, but just to clarify, I understand that, but here's the thing. There's no signature, there's no prosecutions, there's no complaints, it's just all been swept under the rug for 20 years and no one might. It's not plausible, is it? But palliative care, people say, well, look, if we had better palliative care, then we wouldn't need assisted dying. A few things about that. So practically, there's people who, for whatever reason, can't be helped by palliative care. My mum died of palliative care in a hospice, so it's not that I'm against it. But there's some people, that are allergic to pain medicine, or they just have certain symptoms that can't be palliated in a way that they find tolerable. And the Supreme Court in the Lucretia Seals case accepted this, that it works for some but not for all. The second thing is they're not actually competing alternatives. So if you look at the Netherlands, if you look at Belgium, these are countries that actually generally have better palliative care and have continued to improve their palliative care since they've had assisted dying, versus countries that don't have it. And I think the reason for that is that once a country starts taking dignity at the end of life seriously, they want both of those options on the table. And just finally, and I know you don't like long answers, but the third thing is that within countries, the people that use assisted dying are also the people who have more access to palliative care. So it's not like there's one group of people that have, actually, they're complementary, they're not competing.
When you came to the conclusion that euthanasia was something that you really wanted to push forward on, was it a 100% commitment, or did you go looking at the balance of it and say you can't prevent people from wanting to die? It's not fair.
So if you'd asked me when I was first elected to Parliament, I probably would have said I'm not so sure about this. Okay. I'm worried about the abuse.
You were 50-50 on it?
Probably not even 50-50, to be honest. But Lucretia Seals got
more in favour of
it? Probably mildly opposed. But Lucretia Seals got me interested in it because she was a real hero. And I started reading some of the evidence. And I remember one particular piece of evidence. It was about Belgium. They said 1.8% of people who have assisted deaths in Belgium do it without consent. Oh, that's outrageous. You legalise it. Suddenly everyone's getting euthanized. They don't even know what's going on. Well, it turned out, and this was the opponents were using this information to try and spook people. So I got the British Medical Journal article, and where they got it from was it had said previously the figure was 3.1%. Since they legalised, it's gone down because there's more control. Then you say, well, 1.8 is still a lot. Yeah. Well, what they were really talking about is people that get given a bit too much morphine at the end of their life. Yeah. In New Zealand, we think that figure on the best estimates is 4.5%. So
believe that they're choosing.
The more I looked into the evidence, the more I saw that there's a small group of people who have motivations they never quite reveal, who will say anything to defeat it. But once you go to the hard evidence, you always find that the laws are safe and the choice is actually a beautiful thing for people to have.
There's a fascinating lecturer at the University of Auckland whose name escapes me, and please do
better not be Hana Hickey,
who is talking about this notion of people with massive bouts of long-term depression and why they shouldn't have the right to die if they've gone through treatment and tried to cure themselves. Do you agree with that?
Oh, so this is a lecturer that's saying that they should be able to...
that people who have suffered from horrendous bouts of long-term depression deserve
the right, the choice.
Do you
look,
agree?
I don't agree with that. But I think
Why not?
Why not? I think because something that's psychological, in my view, can always be fixed. There's physical things you just cannot fix.
How do you know though?
Yeah.
Because it's similar with the other euthanasia, isn't it? That we can't imagine someone else's pain. So how could mental pain not juxtapose?
I guess it's a question of belief. You know, I believe that things can get better. I understand.
Are you spiritual or religious at all in any way?
Well, I got baptised as a Presbyterian once, but it was
days?
mainly... No, that was really just because my mum was disappointed at having a boy and she thought that was probably the last chance she'd have to put me in a frock. But, you know... So,
not necessarily in the modern world we live in now.
Well, this was the 80s, it was a different time, man.
Righto.
But look, I just want to be clear about one thing, though. Under the law that people are voting on this week and next week, you cannot qualify for assisted dying because of a psychiatric condition. Sure. So that one of the first things the law says, psychiatric condition, no. You've got to be terminally ill. You've got to be in an advanced state of irreversible decline in physical capability. You've got to be mentally competent.
I wonder, because of your initial policy on euthanasia, if you'd be open to persuasion around those mental health issues if you met enough people that were suffering.
I mean, well, look, I always listen to people, but you know, I think when it comes to assisted dying legislation, I kind of feel like I've done my bit.
Righto. We've got to get back to the social questions because there's lots of them. Nickel Dander says, what do you think about the smoke-free 2025 goal conflicting with the cannabis referendum?
Well, I just think it's ludicrous. I mean, look, you know...
The goal is ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean...
What about Winston Peters' idea of dropping down below $20 for cigarettes?
Well, sadly, it's not going to happen because the government's addicted to the revenue. And, you know, the sad thing is if you look
But they need to be addicted to the revenue, don't they? Because the cost in the healthcare system is much higher than the money that they're making. Almost a little...
Oh, not even close. Look, the tobacco revenue is now about $2.2 billion. It's a serious chunk of change. The health budget's only $18 billion. So if you look at those 15% of people that smoke, even if they paid no other taxes, they would be paying enough tobacco tax to pay for their health care. But remember, people who don't smoke still go to hospital and die of something.
Sure, but half of all people that smoke will die of something.
Well, yeah, and when they die, that, you know, it's not like they would have died. They wouldn't have had any health care if they didn't smoke. I mean, just an important point here. People that smoke are massively subsidising everyone else through the current level of taxes. They don't pay as much. They don't collect as much superannuation either. Remember, so
because they die.
Well, exactly. So you know, those taxes are putting a huge cost mainly on poor households now, and I think that's wrong. But I can also tell you, no Minister of Finance is going to cut it.
Sean Stavrovsky, I do apologise if I've got that wrong. I did my best. What will you do with Ihumate on this Fletcher thing?
I think the government's got to uphold the rule of law and property rights.
No deal?
No, there can't be a deal. Ultimately, Fletcher have to be able to develop...
What if they reclassify the land as a land of significance or something like that and do some sort of acquisition?
Well,
are you worried about
the precedent?
Precedent that it
Well,
sets?
here's the thing, and you know, there's a lot of people there who have a treaty settlement, and they're sitting there saying, okay, if somebody contests the settlement, and often there's a lot of contests in treaty settlements between different hapua iwi, then I could lose the right to access what I've fought for through the tribunal for decades sometimes. So no, we have to make sure that Fletcher, who I know what happened in the 1850s, but right now, people who have a piece of paper that's a legal title to a piece of land have to be able, it has to mean something, because if it doesn't, we're like South America.
I don't want to get too far into treaty discussions with you, because we've got so many of you, and you've been incredibly gracious with your time. But I imagine it's because of the people that you've acquired via your social media, in addition to the hordes that we've got. You want to repeal the zero carbon Act, and
That's
you
right.
want to restart oil and gas exploration. Are you not concerned how that will affect the pure New Zealand brand and the 17.2 billion?
Well, first of all, we got the pure New Zealand brand while we had oil and gas exploration and no zero carbon act. So I don't quite follow your logic.
The zeitgeist is changing, obviously, right?
So the zeitgeist. Second of all, I don't believe either of those policies are truly green. First of all, banning oil and gas exploration. You know what that means? When we run out, we're going to have to use something else. And I hope, I'm an electrical engineer, I hope that there's wonderful technology that means we don't need to burn Indonesian coal, but the most likely answer is that we will.
And I guess that's the question, shouldn't we be weaning ourselves off and looking at things like, for example, the extra power that would be generated at Tiwai Point and looking at more hydro schemes and solar as opposed to going and buying coal?
Here's your problem, just as a practical matter. You still need peak load, and the main way to do that is still thermal. So it's not like we don't have enough good intentions. It's just a simple one. Like I say, I'm an electrical engineer. It's just a practical matter. Secondly, on the Zero Carbon Act, I look at the British. You look at their emissions per dollar of GDP or pound of GDP in their case. They have done no better than us in the last 12 years than we have. Now, so you've got to ask yourself, why is that? Because basically there's some low-hanging fruit, and then the Act has lots of trapdoors that get open, so there's no real pain.
It's good to have a target, though, in mind, is it not?
So, well, here's how I'd put it. I think that New Zealand, no matter what happens, we're a passenger in this journey. If we do nothing, then we're going to get seriously punished by our trade partners and the consumers in those markets. On the other hand, we could decide to set lofty targets.
Yeah, why don't we lead instead of be a passenger?
Well, lead the world at shooting ourselves in the foot. So here's a very practical reality for people in Waiuku or at Glenbrook Steel Mill. If we applied the full ETS charge to Glenbrook tomorrow, $50 million on a $600 million turnover, they'd be gone 1,400 people out of work, and then we'd be buying steel probably mainly from China, where they have no environmental regulations just about, and that would increase global emissions, get us more expensive, lower quality steel, and have 1,400 people out of work. So if that sounds like leadership, then
But you don't want the aspirational goals then of something.
Well, I don't think that there can be aspirational goals, because fundamentally there's a floor, which is if we don't do enough, we get punished internationally. But there's a ceiling: we do too much, we get carbon leakage. So the trick is how to keep between the floor and the ceiling.
Matt Holmes, I can guess what David's going to say on this one, but I'll read this question. David, will your party back the farmers around climate change laws, but at the same time keep us honest with clean waterways?
Yeah, so if I look at clean waterways, like I've just been on a bus tour, I don't know if you know, but it's been good fun. And, we visited...
It looked it.
Yeah, well, we visited a lot of farmers. And, what these guys are saying, girls are saying, is we have a farm environment plan that suits our local area. Now, we don't want, people in our community who are slackers who let everyone down. But what we do want is locally set rules that acknowledge our practical realities, because the environment's quite different in different soils, different topography and so on, and that acknowledges the efforts we've already made. And the reason so many people in Farmville are so angry is that, the government's basically put this blanket across the whole country. In some places it probably fits, in a lot of places it doesn't. So we've got to go local on that. And then when it comes to climate, look, the simple question is, again, we're a passenger on this journey, so we've got to fit in with our trade partners. If we go too far, we just kill ourselves for their benefit. If we don't go far enough, they won't buy our stuff.
Would you make a COVID vaccine mandatory?
No, I mean, I don't think that we should be holding people down and forcibly injecting them, and that's nuts. But here's where it gets complicated.
Are you a supporter of a vaccine? Because vaccines take a long time to develop sometimes, right? And a long time for testing, and in some cases 20 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's going to be true whether I support it or not. But, I mean, look, in terms of quality as a technology, I think vaccines, I mean, my mum was one of the last people in the Western world to have polio. She was born the year the vaccine got here. Terrible timing. And it's interesting, that year, 1956, New Zealanders went out onto the tarmac at then Mangere Airport to try and get the vaccine off the plane. That's how desperate people who'd seen the horror of infectious disease were and believed in science. So absolutely, but I'm entirely, I think vaccines are incredible technology, but when it comes to the role
Do you
of
share
government...
some of the concerns about the safety, like you're hearing in the US at the moment?
Well, I mean, look, it's like any medicine.
I guess what I mean, would
yeah.
you pump the brakes a bit as opposed to, well, you might have a US president saying we might have a vaccine before an election or you can have it slightly after.
Yeah,
Would
but,
you
I
pump the
mean,
brakes-
he
pump the
also
brakes
said
away
you
a bit?
should inject yourself with bleach.
That is true.
I mean, look,
Which brings out a good question.
But can I just say something about vaccines? Really, it comes down to the practicality. So I'm a local electorate MP, and I get principals ringing me up, as they did during the measles crisis about a year ago now, so this year's just flown by, and they said, look, we have anti-vaxxer parents that want to send their kids to school unvaccinated. I'm a PCBU under the Health and Safety at Work Act. I'm between a rock and a hard place here, and I always back the principle is to say you have to come with either a vaccination certificate or a medical certificate saying you can't be vaccinated for medical reasons.
So mandatory in schools?
Well, it's a question of who makes the rules, and I think from the point of view of it, I always back my principles in the electorate.
So you believe it should be vaccine should be mandatory in schools?
I think principals should have the right to make that decision, but this is why it's kind of complicated, because it's not about, I mean, if it's mandatory, meaning the army are going to come and hold you down, obviously opposed to that. But then here's the question, you know, if
a mandate has an effect on people, right?
Yeah.
But
But here's the next thing: if you know you can't travel, but then if you're vaccinated, you can.
Yeah.
You know, should you be able to make that an option? Sure. So I think you've got to keep all those options on the table. And when people say, are you pro or against or mandatory or not, I think actually you've got to think through all the different situations.
If it was a situation though where COVID was spreading quite rapidly, in that case, still no mandatory vaccine?
Look, I think in that scenario, most people would evaluate whether it was safe, and probably if it was, they'd choose to do it.
Deborah wants to know whether you'll ban live exports, and if not, why not?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's always these trade-offs between human welfare and animal welfare. And I know that there are people who would like to move the dial and talk it right up towards animal welfare, but I'm just not in favour of that.
I wonder if from the other perspective of it though as well, there's not a huge amount of money involved there, right? And the visuals, again, when we were talking about pure New Zealand, if we look at something like seeing cows floating around on CNN, is it worth it?
Well, I mean, you know, I think
It's
the
not a
problem.
huge amount of money. Obviously,
well,
it
it might be to the people who are involved in the industry, but you know, if we take that attitude, nobody's making a huge amount of money. We'll close the whole economy, but
you need to make a value judgment in government.
Yeah, sure. I don't think we should make policy because one ship sunk. Put it that way.
Yeah, okay. You don't own your own house. You've said, I'll buy a house one day, but like many people in my generation, it's a bit harder. Does it give you a different perspective from other party leaders?
Yeah,
More on
look, I
capital
think.
gains, we know that much.
Well, no, because I don't think it's an effective policy. I mean, you look at Sydney, LA, Vancouver, London, all have capital gains tax, all have higher house prices than us at some point in the last decade.
For many different reasons as well that we should introduce in there, including income.
Yeah, the one thing they have in common is that the capital gains tax just made the government a partner in the gains rather than actually solving the problem of housing supply. So that's the point. So yeah, have a dig at me, but I'll give you back just as
no.
good as
That would be. We can go back and forwards on this, whether an asset gets to be an earning asset gets to be charged or a low income earner gets to be charged for taxes. I suppose it doesn't matter. But on that question, has it changed your perspective on other leaders?
But the issue is it hasn't solved your housing problem. That's the real issue. And I'd just say to you, look, my perspective is we need a New Zealand where everybody can have an opportunity. And one of the biggest opportunities we need is for people to be able to own their own piece of dirt and feel included in this society.
What about closing the gap between the rich and the poor to create opportunity?
Well, the number one thing you've got to do, and you might recall the stats I gave you on the on you know, income or after household expenditure by the lowest 20% of households by income. You know, after income after housing costs is what I'm trying to say. You know, is that trying to make it easier to build a home is one of the most important things we can do for a more equitable society, not more taxes.
How confident are you in the economic policies that you've got? If our GDP began to, so let's say we get a coalition arrangement in place with National and ACT, and our GDP begins to drop and well outpace our contemporaries as a result of some of these policies, would you reverse course, or do you see it as a more sort of Rogernomics moment where you need to rip the Band-Aid off and keep going to turn around this, because you talk about future debt being settled on future generations?
Well, that's incredibly hypothetical, but what I would say
people should know, right?
Well, it's hard to really understand what sort of scenario you're talking about, but what I do think is that ultimately people make better spending decisions with their own money than government do. And if we want to get good investments, if we want to get good spending, if we want to put our money into things that will make us wealthier tomorrow, then less politicians making decisions and more people making decisions is going to leave us better off.
But if some of your policies were enabled and our trajectory was more negative, like that UN report was alluding to before, than our contemporaries, would you say let's pump the brakes on this?
We got a real, well, I mean, what you're really saying is if your policies didn't work, would you still believe in them? Well, of course not. But actually, there's every reason to think that they will work.
I was just saying what I was really trying to get at was how long you'd give it. How long would you give it? Let's say some of these policies. Let's say the GST policy down to 10%, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's a policy to reduce GST from 15% down from 10 for 1 year, and what that does is it recirculates money into the private sector. You know, people in their homes and businesses and their bank balances, $6 billion over a year without any politician showing up for a photo op at AJ Hackett or anything else that they like to do. So that policy is a 1 year termer anyway.
Yeah, sure.
And you know, I mean, I know you got your UN study there, but actually, what that
economics
study
isn't just from the UN, though, right? People,
but what
many
that
even
study
in
saying,
America, where the Chicago School of neoliberalism came out of, they're talking about printing trillions in debt in order to help dig themselves out of COVID.
But how's that worked out for them, though? I mean, you know, once you start borrowing money and printing money, you know, one thing you get is social unrest. And this is why I'm really worried about what the Reserve Bank's doing. Well, actually, for a couple of reasons. One is that, you know, they just printed $100 billion.
Social unrest comes with benefit cuts, though, as well. Are you concerned about that?
No, I'm not.
Why not?
Because I don't even agree with your premise. But you go back to...
What about the austerity that happened in London, the London riots as a result of austerity from the Conservative campaign around 2012? You don't see that as part of...
No, I don't. No, because actually, if you think that having the Labour Party's benefit levels that they had for their first two budgets of this government is some crazy scheme, then you should go and don't talk to me about it, talk to the Labour Party, it's their policy. We're just saying we should go back to that because we've got huge debt and the government should actually be living under the same means and the same rules as everybody else. Everyone else has had to make those sorts of restrictions. You really think that that's going to have riots? You've got to be kidding. But can we just go back to this monetary?
People who are desperate things, don't they? And people
that's a tautology, but you know, who cares? Can we go back to the monetary policy issue? You know, I think this is important. I think it's really important that what this Reserve Bank is doing, printing $100 billion, creates a couple of problems. One is that it's going to be really hard for a future Minister of Finance to say, actually, we're going to raise taxes and reduce spending because interest rates are going up because we don't have the Reserve Bank priming the pumps anymore. So it's going to take a brave politician to reverse what's just happened. And yet if we don't, and we keep factoring in cheap money from the Reserve Bank, at some point we're going to get a lot more of that asset price inflation that you're rightly worried about. And when that does happen, you just go back to the point I was making before you asked about the riots, you know, we actually find that a whole lot of people say, this system doesn't work for me anymore. You know, these asset prices go up, the money doesn't mean anything. And the last time that happened, I mean, it's happened with Sanders and Corbyn and others recently, but the last time that happened, that was really problematic, was actually the 30s, hyperinflation. And that's when some really bad people got elected. So I think, you know, getting monetary policy under control, not just printing money crazily, is so important.
So the US, what they're doing is wrong. What the UK is doing wrong is wrong also. What many Western economies are doing is wrong.
That's
David
right.
Seymour's got it right.
Yeah, that's right, because often governments do stupid things, and they all do stupid things at once. You've got to remember, in the 80s, all those countries reversed their economic policies because they'd been doing them wrong. So it's not about me, and you don't need to make it about me, but actually I think a lot of people can see that trying to get wealthy and trying to make the economy going by printing trillions of dollars is destabilising the economy, it destabilises politics, so it's a big mistake.
I wonder what you would say to someone who loses the winter energy payment, for example.
Well, they didn't have it 2 years ago. And I also say, look, you've got a benefit that's going to a whole lot of people that don't need it. Meanwhile, you've got kids currently at intermediate who have no understanding of the decisions currently being made in their name, and they are going to have either less services or more taxes and less opportunity and choice as a result of decisions that have been made this year. So I'd say, hang on a second, this is something that we didn't even need 2 years ago. Are we going to keep that along with a whole lot of other wasteful spending and put it onto those kids? And I think most people would say no.
Hard if the house is cold though, eh? But
well, if it was a winter energy payment, answer me this, why isn't it more generous in the South Island where it's colder?
David Seymour, we thank you very much for time. You've been incredibly generous with it, and we really
I didn't realise
we
it's 9
massively.
o'clock.
It was amazing that you kept going, and we got lots of comments. So we really do appreciate your time. Best of luck, sir. Thank you so much. Tomorrow, the Green Party. Great to have you in tonight. Bye.